Welcome back! My name is Baller Scuba. This is Video Games Over Time. We are still in 1983, and we are still in Ultima 3. When we last left off, we beat the game. We showed off another way to make more money for some reason. That was a little weird for a final video, but we'll talk about that. And then we explored the final dungeon and, in a way, defeated the final boss of the game. I should point out before we move on that if you are playing a different version of the game, a later version of the game, which we will talk about more in detail when that game actually does come out in our timeline. The process is a little bit different. You do need a special item at the end that you would then use to defeat the final boss, but ultimately it is still just an item usage to beat the final boss. And then in that version, you also have to escape from the final dungeon before you can officially win, which I'm not sure I could have done with the party that I had based on the final few fights with those invisible floors. And then as a reward, they give you a little bit more of an ending, or at least a little bit more information in the ending than what we got. But once again, we will talk about that when that version does come out. So let's talk about what we did do, and we'll talk about how the game holds up today. Ultima 3 Exodus, was it fun? And my answer is yes. It is a fun game to play. And I do have to put an asterisk on there. For most people, you're going to want to cheat, and we'll go into that as we continue. But basically, I had fun personally because I cheated to save me quite a bit of time and hassle and frustration that kind of comes with the game. But we'll start with the beginning. Let's talk about the manual of the game. The manual is probably the highlight for me of the entire game. And maybe that's because I do enjoy reading, but I feel that the story that's presented there, the background information on the world and the plot and the enemies and the things that you're going to encounter in town, I feel that they are the best of possibly any game that we have played, but definitely any RPG that we have played. And I think that the way that they describe things in the manual don't necessarily correlate to what happened in the game, but the way that they described everything made you want to get into the game, made you want to cast the magic, because there were two unique books just describing the magic and the effort that got involved with the spells that you were casting instead of just kind of telling you what the spells did. But ultimately, we didn't really use those spells all that much, did we? But the manual for me is probably the best part of the game. I think it was a huge improvement over definitely Ultima 2. Ultima 1, I would say, was fairly comparable, but I would say that Ultima 3 was better at the manual. Then we kind of get into the game, and there are parties in the game, and that's a huge improvement over Ultima 1 and Ultima 2. The fact that you can have 4 party members with you as you go forward, it's a huge deal to be able to have a party and to have individual tactics for each person in the party as you move forward. That's a big deal. It is something that we did see in Wizardry, where you could have 6 party members. So it's not necessarily as well-rounded of a party in Ultima, but it still is a vast improvement over what they were doing before. I would argue that the way that they have the parties set up in Ultima 3 allows for more variance because there were so many different classes that you could choose from, so many different races that you could choose from, that ultimately you were not going to be able to see everything available in the game, and that kind of leads to more of people wanting to play the game again. See how they can do it with a different party, with a different setup kind of entirely. And so that is a huge improvement, and that's going to go a long way to helping people remember the game well. So that is a huge improvement. In terms of graphics, I think the graphics are slightly improved, absolutely, but not a huge improvement. Basically, the biggest thing for me was the colors, and the colors are important, but it's not a huge improvement for graphics for me. The big improvement, of course, is sound. Sound is new to Ultima, and new to pretty much any RPG that we have played to this point. And it makes a huge difference to have the music in there. Granted, I like some music more than other. The congratulatory music was loud. That was the main reason that I didn't like it. So was Ambrosia's music. It started becoming annoying when I was trying to talk over it. But if you're not trying to talk over it, it's a lot more likely that you're going to like the music. So once again, kind of something for me personally that was a downside, but it's not going to be for most people. Then we can talk about the gameplay itself. Once you get into the game, the first thing you're going to need to do is level grind. Pretty much like any RPG that we have played, the first thing that you do is tedious. And in this game, I feel that it is among the worst that we have seen because you almost need to find ways around the normal level grinding system. You needed to find ways basically to manipulate the game in order to survive. And we have seen it in other games. Wizardry had that definitely, where you're kind of going out and chances are you're going to die if you go out. And so you need other ways to get the experience and gold that you need. However, in this game, it was kind of done in a way that it's almost impossible. Like, no matter how the odds roll against you, you need to find something else. And you needed so much gold. You needed so much food. You needed so much experience. Well, not really experience, but you needed so much that it was almost guaranteed that you were going to need to do that. That you were going to need to find another way, either create party members and transfer all their stuff out and then get rid of them, or try to find ways to just have one person in the party. Maybe they survive, maybe they don't. Maybe you go into the dungeons. Chances are you're not going to make it. There were so many ways that you could manipulate the system that I feel like the game expected you to. And we did see that in Wizardry as well, but I feel like in this game it felt worse because this was a new system for Ultima players, and I feel that ultimately it came down to a balancing issue. And for me, I feel that if you just got rid of the need for food altogether, it would have made the game so much better. Without the food mechanic, going out and level grinding isn't going to cost you much unless you get hit or people start dying and you start losing your health, right? You can avoid the need to manipulate the system if you didn't need to buy food all the time. And that became a glaring issue. The more that I played was just, if you got rid of food, it would all be fine. Like, you can make money without food. You can set up a party that can kill enemies in front of you if you didn't need food. But if you need food, then even going around to try to find the fights is costing you more money than it's worth. And that was the experience that I had, that you would starve to death in Ultima 3 if you didn't manipulate the system. So that was kind of the downside for me. And once again, that's my experience. Other people are going to have different experiences because it's all just kind of a roll of the dice, and I get that. But based on the experiences that I had, if you don't manipulate the system, you will lose. And that's not the way to set up a game, I don't think. That's my basically main complaint about the game, and possibly the only complaint that I had of the game. I feel that the dungeons were done well. Do I want, things better? Sure. But the way that the dungeons were done, I feel that they were done well. There were secrets hidden in them. They were fairly predictable, because if you went through a level and you couldn't figure out where a certain way forward would be, you kind of just run into the walls, and the encounter rate is typically low enough that you could just walk around and try to figure out where things were. I think, once again, the gremlins could have been removed. I didn't think they were necessary. The traps I'm okay with, but there was nothing unfair in the dungeons ever. There was nothing that was just like, well, if you go forward from here, you're stuck forever, that we have seen in previous games. So ultimately, I feel that the dungeons were done well. They were kind of short. In terms of improvements, I would, of course, like treasure chests to not be equal everywhere, that a treasure chest shouldn't just be a treasure chest. If I kill Balrons, it shouldn't be the same as if I killed orcs. It's just different, and I should get more of a reward for killing harder enemies than I do for killing the most basic enemies that the game has to offer. That is something that we have not seen in RPGs, though, and so it's not fair for me to expect that of a game, but that is the way that I would like the games to start going. So that's just kind of my personal opinion on it, but at the time that was standard, so it's not like I'm not holding it against the game. It's just an improvement I would like to see as the series continues, and shocker, the series will continue. They gave it away in the last video. They're like, play Ultima 4! But that is something that I would like. I would also like more of a balancing when it comes to the actual battling itself. The fact that I really did go out of my way to make a party that could use ranged weapons, that each person in it could use ranged weapons, and that made a huge difference in the game, right? You could see the difference between me being able to take on Balrons with the bows, which was in all of the dungeons, as opposed to me taking on the Balrons in the final dungeon without that. Even though I had a stronger weapon, right? It had more attack power, the exotic weapon, over the +4 bow. I was so much worse off because I had to walk up to the enemy to fight them. Range was very important in this game, and it might have been the most important thing when it came to fighting. More important than even having access to spells was making sure that your characters had access to a +4 bow. With that said, that's the reason why they made everything basically immune to all weapons except for the exotic weapons in the final dungeon, to make it more difficult for you, number one. But number two, then you're up against the invisible floors, which I was not a fan of. But since they could attack me and I couldn't see where the attacks were coming from, that became the hardest part of the game. And it became almost a roll of the dice. Was the enemy up and to the left or up and to the right? They can attack diagonally. I can't. They weren't straight ahead of me. How many turns am I wasting trying to find an enemy? And ultimately that made it very difficult, but I don't think that it was a fair difficulty, because it once again became kind of random whether I was making the right calls or not. And no matter how much I sat and thought about where the floors were, it was going to be random. As far as I could tell, the attack animations didn't show up from where the enemy actually attacked from. It was just showing that this person got hit. So I would love for them to be able to fix that in some way, but I get why they did it in order to make it more difficult. And then finally we did have the final fight with the final boss, and it wasn't a fight. And that always makes me a little sad, because that means that the invisible floors were basically the final boss of the game. And then after that, it was just a matter of using the plot to beat the game. And although they did give you good hints, I thought that the hints in the game were done well. I feel that the final boss was a disappointment and felt a little bit anticlimactic, especially since we don't really know what was going on other than there was a computer. And I feel like this is something that will have to be dealt with in other versions of the game or in later entries in the franchise, trying to explain what we just saw, because the game didn't really explain it at all. Why was there randomly a computer? We don't know. But that is how the game ends. So overall, like, the dungeons, like I said, were good. I love the upgrade in the graphics in the version that at least we played, compared to the other games that we have seen. It was a little weird kind of going from a first-person perspective as you walk through the dungeon to having the same like strategic tactical fight that we saw in that kind of battling where everybody kind of has to move around, but we're still on the same square. That was a little weird. But yeah, just kind of the difference between the battling and exploring the dungeon. It just didn't mesh. It's hard to imagine it meshing in your mind, other than this is how the game works. But once you kind of get through that, it was fine, I think. So that's kind of where we are. The game is fun. It is something that I would recommend to people that are fans of role-playing games as a whole. But with that said, I would recommend just kind of giving yourself either a massive amount of food, just max out your food when you start. You probably won't be using all of it too much. I think you'll probably need in the range of 30,000 food overall in order to beat the game. But give everybody max food. That way you don't have to worry about it. And then it'll be a much more fun experience for you with that done. If you're not a fan of RPGs kind of as a whole, this game's probably not going to convince you otherwise. This probably isn't a game for you, but overall, I would say this is the best RPG that we have played. It put many of the good things together from the previous Ultima games and the previous Wizardry games that we have seen, and they combined it into a good package. So I would say this is the best RPG that we have played to this point. So of course I would recommend it if RPGs are something that interest you. But once again, if you're not a fan, it's not going to do anything to convince you that this is a good game for you. I think there are other games that I would recommend, but this is not one of them. So overall, good game. I enjoyed it, and that's my modern take on the game. When the game was released, it proved to be popular. By August 1986, Ultima 3 sold over 100,000 copies. The critics were also positive about the game. They believed that the game was a vast improvement over the previous two games. In particular, the critics praised the game's plot as well as the new combat system. The game had some controversy surrounding it, however. The demon depicted on the cover of the game caused some protest from some religious groups. They accused the game of promoting the worship of Satan and corrupting America's youth. As time has gone on, views on Ultima 3 have remained positive. Ultima 3 is seen as the foundation of role-playing games that would come in the future. While the game may have been overshadowed by what came after it, Ultima 3 represents an important step in the history of role-playing video games and video games as a whole. No one seems to think it represents Satan worship anymore. Looking ahead, Ultima 3 would not be the last game in the Ultima franchise. We will return to the world of Sosaria again in the future. Capitalizing on Ultima 3's success, Origin Systems would continue to create video games. We will hear from them again. That, of course, means that we will hear from Richard Garriott again in the future as well. That will do it for the story of Ultima 3 for now. My name is Baller Scuba. This has been Video Games Over Time. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in our next video when we start serving.